The autumn sun spread a warm golden light across the rolling prairie outside the small frontier town of Willow Creek. Dust drifted gently along the wagon road, while cattle grazed quietly beyond weathered wooden fences. On the edge of town stood a modest ranch where Ethan Walker worked from sunrise until long after sunset. At 33, Ethan was known as one of the hardest-working cowboys in the county. He spoke little, kept his promises, and never turned away someone in need. Yet, when evening settled over the ranch, only silence waited for him inside his small cabin. Years earlier, Ethan had lost both his parents and later the woman he had hoped to marry. Since then, he had poured every ounce of his heart into caring for his horses and rebuilding the struggling ranch they had left behind. His neighbors admired him, but few truly knew how lonely he had become. One crisp afternoon, Ethan rode into Willow Creek with a wagon load of fresh vegetables and firewood to sell at the general store. As he tied his horse outside, he noticed a young woman standing near the porch with a worn leather suitcase at her feet. Her simple blue dress had been carefully mended several times, and a light brown shawl rested over her shoulders. Though travel dust covered her boots, she carried herself with quiet grace. People passing by couldn't help glancing in her direction. She was strikingly beautiful, yet there was sadness hidden behind her gentle smile. The storekeeper stepped outside and shook his head apologetically. "I'm sorry, miss," he said. "The boarding house is full. Maybe another town will have room." The young woman thanked him softly instead of complaining. She picked up her heavy suitcase and began walking toward the edge of town, though she clearly had nowhere to go. Ethan watched for a moment before climbing down from his wagon. "Ma'am," he called kindly. She turned surprised. "You look like you've had a long journey." "I have," she answered with a tired smile. "But I'll find my way."
Welcome to Havenwood,
Her voice
Clara.
carried quiet
It's
courage
beautiful,
rather than
just like I
self-pity.
promised.
"My name's Ethan
It's even
Walker."
more beautiful, Ethan.
She nodded politely. "I'm Clara Bennett." For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. A cool breeze stirred the leaves overhead, while church bells echoed faintly across town. Ethan glanced toward the empty road, leading out into miles of open prairie. "There isn't another town close enough before nightfall," he said. "The roads aren't safe after dark." Clara looked down. "I know. You got family here?" She shook her head. "No, sir." Ethan hesitated. He wasn't used to inviting strangers into his life. But leaving her alone didn't sit right with him. "My ranch has an old guest cabin," he finally said. "It's clean enough. You can stay there until you figure out what's next." Clara's eyes widened. "You don't even know me." Ethan smiled gently. "I know enough." She studied his face, searching for any sign of dishonesty, but found only quiet sincerity. As they loaded her suitcase in the wagon, Ethan glanced at her once more and gave a small, awkward laugh. "You know," he said, scratching the back of his neck, "you're far too beautiful for a lonely cowboy like me." Clara looked at him with warm, understanding eyes. A soft smile slowly appeared on her face. Then she whispered words that Ethan would never forget. "Then I'll stay until you're not lonely." As the wagon rolled toward the ranch beneath the glowing western sunset, neither of them realized that this unexpected meeting was about to change both of their lives forever. The first morning at Ethan Walker's ranch began with the gentle crow of a rooster and the golden light of sunrise spilling across the prairie. Clara stepped out of the little guest cabin and breathed in the cool country air. Wildflowers swayed beside the fence. Horses grazed peacefully in the pasture, and the smell of fresh coffee drifted from Ethan's cabin. She had expected to leave after one night, but something about the quiet ranch felt safe, a feeling she had not known for a long time. Ethan was already in the barn feeding the horses when Clara walked over. "Good morning," she said with a cheerful smile. He looked up and tipped his hat. "Morning. Hope you slept well." "I did. Better than I have in months." Ethan handed her a warm biscuit wrapped in a clean cloth. "Breakfast isn't much, but it'll keep you going." Clara smiled gratefully. "It's more than enough. Thank you." Instead of sitting quietly, Clara noticed several empty water buckets and carried them to the nearby creek without being asked. By the time Ethan finished brushing the horses, she had already returned with fresh water and begun sweeping the barn floor. "You didn't have to do all this," Ethan said. "I know," Clara replied. But kindness should always be returned.
Morning's
Her
here.
words
Smells
stayed with him
good.
for the rest
Good
of the day.
morning.
Over the
Need a
following
hand?
week,
Already on
Clara
it.
became a natural part of the
Always.
ranch.
Look at that
She
sunrise.
planted vegetables beside the cabin, repaired torn curtains with neat stitches, baked warm bread in the evenings, and even learned the names of every horse. The old ranch, once filled only with silence, slowly came alive with laughter and conversation. One afternoon, while repairing a broken fence together, Ethan noticed Clara gently comforting an injured foal that had caught its leg between two rails. She knelt beside the frightened animal, speaking softly until it stopped trembling. "There now," she whispered. "You're safe." The little horse relaxed as though it understood every word. Ethan watched quietly. "You've got a gift with animals." "My father raised horses," Clara said with a small smile. "He taught me they're treated best with patience, not fear." For the first time, Ethan asked about her family. She looked toward the distant mountains before answering. "My parents passed away during a harsh winter 2 years ago. I'm sorry. So am I?" After a quiet pause, she continued. "My uncle took me in, but he cared more about my inheritance than about me. When I refused to marry a wealthy man twice my age, I left with nothing except that suitcase." Ethan stopped hammering the fence. "You walked away from everything?" "I walked toward my freedom." Her calm answer filled him with admiration. Later that evening, the two sat beside a crackling campfire beneath a sky filled with stars. Neither of them spoke for several minutes. The silence no longer felt awkward. It felt peaceful. Finally, Ethan broke it. "I haven't laughed as much in years." Clara looked into the dancing flames. "I haven't felt welcome anywhere in years." Their eyes met across the fire. Neither spoke another word, yet both understood something important had begun to grow between them. Not because of grand promises or dramatic moments, but through shared work, quiet evenings, and simple kindness. As the fire burned lower, Ethan realized that for the first time since losing his family, the ranch no longer felt empty. And deep inside Clara's heart, hope quietly began replacing the loneliness she had carried for so long. Neither of them noticed a stranger on horseback, watching the ranch from a distant hill before turning back toward Willow Creek under the cover of darkness. 2 days later, dark clouds rolled across the wide Wyoming sky.
We made it.
The warm
We are all
autumn
safe.
breeze disappeared.
I knew we could do it
replaced
together.
by a cold wind that bent the tall prairie grass. Ethan looked toward the horizon and frowned. "We're in for a hard storm," he said, fastening the saddle on his horse. "We need to bring the cattle closer and secure the barn." Clara nodded without hesitation. "Tell me what to do." For the next several hours, they worked side by side. Ethan rode across the pasture, guiding the cattle toward shelter while Clara gathered loose tools, covered the hay with heavy canvas, and closed every cabin window against the rising wind. By sunset, rain poured from the sky in heavy sheets. Thunder echoed through the hills, and flashes of lightning lit the prairie like daylight. Just then, a loud crack split the air. One of the old cottonwood trees had fallen across the corral fence. "The horses!" Ethan shouted. Without thinking of her own safety, Clara grabbed a lantern and ran after him. The frightened horses circled wildly inside the broken corral. Ethan carefully approached the largest stallion, speaking in a calm voice, while Clara gently soothed the younger horses one by one. "It's all right," she whispered, stroking a frightened mare's neck. "Easy now, you're safe." Her steady voice settled the animals long enough for Ethan to repair the broken gate with spare rails and rope. Soaked by the rain and covered in mud, they finally led the horses safely into the barn. As the storm
Follow me,
raged
hurry!
outside,
They're safe
they stood
now. Thank
quietly,
you. Thank you.
catching their breath.
We did
Ethan
it.
looked at Clara with grateful eyes. "You could have stayed in the cabin." She smiled. "You didn't." He chuckled softly. "I guess not." When the rain eased, they lit a small lantern and sat on fresh hay inside the warm barn. Outside, water dripped steadily from the roof while distant thunder faded into the mountains. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "When I was younger, I dreamed this ranch would be full of families someday." Clara listened quietly. "But after losing the woman, I planned to marry to a terrible illness." He paused, his voice heavy. "I convinced myself that dream was over. I'm so sorry, Ethan. I stopped believing someone could choose a simple life with a man who had little more than worn boots and honest hands. Clara lowered her eyes before speaking. I understand more than you know. She slowly reached into her small satchel and removed a faded photograph. It showed her standing beside her parents in front of a small horse farm. My mother always said beauty fades, but kindness grows stronger every year. She smiled sadly. After they were gone, people stopped seeing me as their daughter. They only saw someone they could use. Ethan looked at the photograph with care before handing it back. They were lucky to have you. A tear shimmered in Clara's eyes. And I'm beginning to think maybe I was lucky to find this ranch. The words warmed Ethan's heart more than the fire lantern beside them. Outside, the storm finally passed. Moonlight broke through the clouds and spilled across the wet prairie. As they stepped from the barn, thousands of stars slowly appeared overhead. Ethan looked at Clara and quietly said, "You know, this place doesn't feel lonely anymore." She smiled, her eyes reflecting the starlight. Maybe that's because home isn't only a place. He looked at her, waiting. It's the person who makes you feel welcome. Before Ethan could answer, they noticed fresh horse tracks leading away from the edge of the ranch. Someone had been watching them again. Neither of them knew who it was, or why. The next morning,
what is it that you want?
The prairie looked peaceful again.
I have come to
Sunlight
collect what is
sparkled on the
mine.
grass after the night's rain, and birds sang as if the storm had never happened. But Ethan could not stop thinking about the fresh horse tracks outside the ranch. Someone had been there. Someone had been watching. After finishing breakfast, Ethan rode into Willow Creek to buy nails and horse feed. Clara stayed behind, tending the vegetable garden and hanging fresh laundry beside the guest cabin. As Ethan entered the general store, the owner greeted him with a worried look. "Morning, Ethan." "Morning." The old man hesitated before speaking. "There's a fellow asking questions about the young woman staying at your ranch." Ethan's expression hardened. "What kind of questions?" "He says her name is Clara Bennett, claims she's his niece, and that she ran away with money that belongs to the family." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. "Did you believe him?" The storekeeper shook his head. "I don't know what to believe," but the man didn't seem happy. Ethan thanked him and hurried outside. On his ride home, doubt crept into his mind. Clara had always been honest with him. Hadn't she? Why had someone come looking for her? Had she told him everything? When he reached the ranch, he found Clara sitting beneath a large oak tree, quietly repairing one of his worn work shirts. She looked up with her usual warm smile. "You're back." Instead of smiling, Ethan asked
I saw your
gently,
name on the papers in town.
"Clara,
Can you
is
tell
there
me what
something you
happened?
haven't told me?"
I never thought he'd
Her hands
find me.
froze. "What do you
know
mean?"
why I'm here.
"I met someone in town." The color slowly faded from her face. "My uncle, you knew he'd come." Clara lowered her eyes. "I hoped he never would." Ethan sat beside her. "He claims you stole from your family." For a long moment, only the wind moved to the branches above them. Then Clara reached into her suitcase and carefully removed a folded envelope. "I didn't steal anything." She handed it to him. Inside were legal papers signed by her late parents. "My father left me a small horse farm," she explained quietly. "After my parents died, my uncle tried to force me into marrying a wealthy landowner. If I refused, he wanted control of the property." Ethan looked at the documents. "I left everything behind rather than live without freedom." "Then why didn't you tell me?" A tear rolled gently down Clara's cheek. "Because every time people learned about the land, they stopped seeing me." She looked into Ethan's eyes. "They saw money. I wanted someone to know me before they knew what I owned." Ethan's heart sank. He realized his questions had wounded the very woman who had trusted him with her kindness. "I'm sorry, Clara." She smiled sadly. "I don't blame you. Doubt comes easily after people have been hurt." Before Ethan could answer, the sound of horses echoed across the yard. 3 riders entered through the front gate. Leading them was a stern-looking man in an expensive black coat. He climbed down from his horse and tipped his hat only slightly. "There you are," he said coldly. Clara stood slowly. "Hello, Uncle Victor." Victor's sharp eyes turned toward Ethan. "I've come to take my niece home." Clara stepped closer to Ethan, her voice calm but steady. "I'm not going with you." Victor smiled without warmth. "We'll see about that." The peaceful ranch suddenly felt smaller than ever, and Ethan knew the greatest test of their growing love had finally arrived. A tense silence settled over the ranch. The wind carried dust across the yard as Uncle Victor stood with his two hire riders. Ethan stepped beside Clara, his shoulders straight and his voice calm. "She has already told you," Ethan said. "She isn't going with you." Victor let out a short laugh. "You don't understand, Cowboy. She belongs with her family." Clara met her uncle's cold gaze without fear. "A family protects each other," she replied. "You only wanted my father's land." Victor's smile disappeared. "You have no proof." "I do," Clara answered, holding up the envelope containing her parents' signed papers. Victor reached for the documents, but Ethan gently moved Clara behind him. "You'll keep your hands to yourself," Ethan said firmly, realizing the situation could become worse. The town marshal, who had been passing nearby, rode into the ranch with two deputies after noticing the raised voices. "What's going on here?" the marshal asked. Victor quickly tried to explain his side, claiming Clara was an ungrateful niece who had run away with property that belonged to him. The marshal turned to Clara. "Miss Bennett." Clara calmly handed him the legal papers. The marshal read every page carefully while everyone waited in silence.
This land belongs to Clara.
Finally,
Uncle Jed, you
he
must
looked
leave
at
this
Victor.
ranch immediately.
"These documents are lawful.
Just look at him go.
The property
He's
belongs
gone.
to Miss
Thank
Bennett,
you, Ethan.
exactly as her parents intended." Victor's face turned pale. "You're making a mistake." "No," the marshal replied. "You are." Seeing that his lies had failed, Victor climbed back onto his horse. "This isn't over," he muttered before riding away with the two men. The ranch grew quiet once more. Clara let out a slow breath she had been holding for months. "It's finally over," she whispered. Ethan looked at her with gentle eyes. "No," he said softly. "It's finally beginning." That evening, the neighbors gathered at the ranch after hearing what had happened. They brought fresh pies, coffee, and warm laughter. The old ranch, once so lonely, was filled with friendly voices. As the sun dipped below the distant mountains, Ethan asked Clara to walk with him to the hill overlooking the pasture. The prairie glowed gold beneath the evening sky. "I've been thinking," Ethan began. She smiled. "That usually means something important." He chuckled. "When you first came here, I told you that you were too beautiful for a lonely cowboy." "I remember. I was wrong." Clara tilted her head. "You weren't too beautiful." He looked into her eyes. "I simply believed I wasn't worthy of someone as kind as you." Clara gently took his rough, weathered hand into hers. "Ethan, beauty isn't what makes a person worth loving." She squeezed his hand. "Kindness does." He swallowed hard, emotion filling his voice. "I don't have a grand house. I know. I don't have great wealth. I know. I only have this ranch, these horses, and an honest heart." Clara smiled through happy tears. "That's everything I was praying to find." For the first time in many years, Ethan allowed himself to believe that his lonely days were ending. As they stood together beneath the painted western sky, he quietly asked, "Clara, would you stay?" She smiled with all the warmth in her heart. "I already told you," she whispered. "I'll stay until you're not lonely." And this time, Ethan knew she meant forever. Winter quietly gave way to spring, and the hills around Willow Creek turned green once again.
I love you, Ethan.
Wildflowers bloomed across the prairie, filling the air with color and sweet fragrance. The lonely ranch that had once echoed with silence now carried the cheerful sounds of horses, birds, and friendly laughter. Word spread through town that Ethan Walker and Clara Bennett were to be married. Everyone wanted to help. Mrs. Harper from the bakery baked fresh bread and apple pies. The blacksmith polished Ethan's old belt buckle until it shone like silver. Children gathered wildflowers to decorate the little white church, while ranchers from neighboring farms repaired the church fence as a wedding gift. On a bright Saturday morning, the church bell rang across the valley. Ethan stood at the front of the small wooden church, wearing his cleanest shirt, polished boots, and his father's old cowboy hat. His hands trembled slightly. The town marshal smiled and whispered, "I've seen you face stampeding cattle without blinking. Funny how love can make a brave man nervous." Ethan laughed softly. "I reckon it's because this matters more." The church door slowly opened. Clara stepped inside, wearing a simple ivory dress she had sown herself. A small bouquet of prairie wildflowers rested in her hands, and the sunlight shining through the windows made her gentle smile seem even brighter. Every eye in the church turned toward her, but Clara looked only at Ethan. When she reached him, he quietly whispered, "You're beautiful." She smiled warmly. "I've never cared about being beautiful. I know. I only wanted someone who would see my heart." Ethan's eyes filled with tears. "I saw it the day you chose kindness over comfort." The pastor spoke simple but meaningful words about faith, trust, friendship, and the strength of two people who choose to carry life's burdens together. When the vows were finished, Ethan gently slipped a modest silver ring onto Clara's finger. "It isn't expensive," he said softly. Clara smiled. "It reminds me of the man who gave it." The church filled with warm laughter. "And that's worth more than gold." After they were pronounced husband and wife, the little church erupted in joyful applause. Outside, friends threw flower petals instead of rice, and children laughed as Ethan helped Clara into the wagon decorated with ribbons and fresh flowers. The celebration continued at the ranch until sunset. Families shared homemade food. Musicians played cheerful fiddle tunes, and neighbors danced beneath strings of lanterns hanging between old oak trees. As evening settled over the prairie, Ethan and Clara quietly slipped away from the celebration and climbed the small hill overlooking their ranch. The sky blazed with shades of orange, pink, and gold. The horses grazed peacefully below. Smoke curled gently from the cabin chimney. Clara rested her head on Ethan's shoulder. "This place doesn't feel lonely anymore," he said. "No," she answered softly. "It feels like home." Ethan smiled. "You remember what I told you the day we met?" She nodded. "You said I was too beautiful for a lonely cowboy. And you answered." Clara looked into his eyes with the same gentle smile that at first captured his heart. "I'll stay until you're not lonely." Ethan took her hand. "You kept your promise." She squeezed his hand gently. "So did you." Together they watched the sun disappear beyond the endless western horizon, knowing that true love had never been about wealth, beauty, or perfect circumstances. It had been found in quiet acts of kindness, unwavering trust, honest hearts, and the courage to open a lonely door to a stranger in need. And from that day forward, whenever travelers passed the little ranch outside Willow Creek, they often spoke of the smiling couple who welcomed everyone with warmth and compassion. For Ethan and Clara had discovered the greatest treasure the Wild West could ever offer, not gold hidden beneath the earth, but a faithful heart waiting to be found. The end.